Everyone. My fault, sorry. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Housing, Planning and Development Scrutiny Panel on this very cold, snowy December evening. Okay, so first thing is filming at meetings, just to remind everybody here, and particularly members of the public, that by entering the room of this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed. This meeting, the proceedings of this meeting will be uploaded by the council to the website for live broadcast and subsequent viewing, streaming. So just please be aware there's further information in the notice on the front page of the agenda. Okay. Apologies for absence. I don't believe we received any apologies for absence.
No apologies.
No, and I've had apologies for lateness from Councillor Hymas, who I'm sure will be joining us shortly. No items of urgent business as far as I'm aware? No, thank you very much. Okay, do any members of the panel here have any declarations of interest to make in relation to the items on the agenda this evening? It seems not. Okay. Right, next item is deputations, petitions, presentations and questions. So we've had one question and one deputation submitted. So we received the question first. So this question was received from Alex Davis from Chestnuts Primary School. Alex, would you like to come forward to the microphone here and read out your question? You just press the button on the right with the little hand on it to turn the microphone on.
Okay, just to be clear as well, this is a question from the school. Our head, Mrs. Horde, Katie Horde, was going to come to ask it, but because of the weather hasn't managed to make it. So the question we have as a school is, how will our pupils and families be protected from the increase in pollution and vehicle traffic caused by the proposed permanent vehicle entrance opposite the school? This is with regards to the St Anne's development, the new development that was approved the other week.
Thank you very much for your question, Alex. So I've got a response here that's been put together with the help of council officers. So I'm just going to read that out for you. So the planning application, which had the reference number HGY 2022-1833, that was submitted by Hill Residential Catalyst Housing Limited and Catalyst by Design Limited for the St Anne's Hospital site, was considered by the Council's Planning Subcommittee on Tuesday, the 29th of November this year. After considering a detailed report and hearing from objectors of the scheme, including from the school as well as supporters, the committee resolved to grant planning permission subject to various conditions and legal obligations being agreed. The report and discussions addressed concerns from school children about the access opposite Chestnuts Primary School being used for construction traffic. There are two proposed site access points, and the majority of works will use an access point to the east of the school, and the developers have committed to minimising traffic opposite the school. The level of traffic using this entrance once the development is complete will be low due to the low level of parking on the site, and the inclusion of measures to promote the use of sustainable transport will also help. The committee's resolution referred to heads of terms of legal agreements, including the following to help improve air quality and safety. So there's a list of 7 items here. Highway works, the creation of 2 new pedestrian crossings on St Anne's Road, 1 signalised crossing and 1 zebra crossing. Then traffic management measures, which included a contribution of £80,000 towards the feasibility, design and consultation relating to the implementation of traffic management measures in the area surrounding the site. St Anne's Cycle Lane, providing a contribution of £150,000 towards a study of the feasibility and design of a protected cycle track on St Anne's Road. Regarding construction logistics and management, there's a contribution of £10,000 towards the assessment and monitoring of a detailed construction logistics and management plan, which was secured by condition. Then regarding Vision Zero, there's provision of £24,000 contribution towards reducing traffic accidents in the vicinity of the application site and supporting healthy streets. And finally, residents liaison group, which this point said that the applicant shall use reasonable endeavours to run, facilitate and organise quarterly meetings with local residents groups, schools and businesses during the demolition and construction works relating to the whole development. Now, the committee's resolution referred to conditions which also include a demolition logistics plan, demolition environmental management plan, construction logistics plan and a construction environmental management plan, where approval from the council will need to be sought in due course. Discharging these conditions will require evidence of engagement with the liaison group that I just mentioned. So that's the end of the answer. So under the Constitution, Mr. Davis, you have the option to ask one follow-up question for elucidation purposes only. So if you'd like to.
I don't really have a follow-up question. I'd just like to say, I would like to ask that you kind of keep the kind of health and safety of our students at the forefront of your mind as the development is going ahead. And that's it really. Thank you for your answer. Very thorough and detailed.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming today. And we certainly will keep the safety of the children of St Anne's Chesterton's Primary School and the area around in the forefront of our thoughts, as you ask. Thank you. I'm not sure why that's happening. I'll try and stop it. Is that because my laptop's going to be close to it? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Right. Secondly, up to this item, we've received a deputation from Haringey Defend Council Housing, and we've got Paul Burnham and Jacob Secker here from Haringey Defend Council Housing to provide their deputation. So you are allowed 3 minutes in total to provide your deputation. So I'd like to ask you, if you could please, to do your absolute best to keep it to that time, because I will be stopping you if you go on too long. Thank you very much. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Paul Burnham and Jacob Secker. Point one, the cost of living crisis is not the time to be promoting much higher rents for 870 Haringey Council new build homes. Last week's budget report failed to assess properly either the relative amounts of the new homes rent or the effect on tenants. There was not even a detailed financial case. There is a large and widening gap between new homes rent and the rents of the existing stock. New homes now more than £60 a week higher on average. That's a bad thing, and it should be an objective of the council to prevent this from happening. London affordable rent is a discredited rent model which is being withdrawn by the Mayor of London for new tenancies. Shelter has produced a report showing that London affordable rent is not affordable for lower income working families because it takes more than 30% of incomes in rent. They forgot the service charges. So the service charges make it much worse. We believe that Haringey Council is making a strategic turn towards higher rents. The report indicates that future social rents for new homes will be set at the cap, which is the maximum possible amount. This would be a gross breach of the rent regulations, and we can provide you with further details in discussion. The housing revenue account data in the budget shows that next year's rent income is 13.8% above this year, then rising to 52% above the present figure by 2027. Even though these rents are supposedly controlled by government, these increases are way beyond what government is permitting. And with policies like these, screwing down our rights to knowledge and consultation is likely to follow. So, point two, we are told that the amounts of the rents and service charges are fixed, and so there is no need for consultation, but that's factually incorrect. It should be our right to be consulted on the £98 million in rents and £12 million in tenant service charges within the annual budget. Point three, furthermore, The massive detailed management reports which previously went to the Homes for Haringey board and were available online have been removed from public view and removed from the view of councillors as well. This includes the whole range of activity affecting our lives as tenants and residents, specifically including fire safety. Our recommendation is to set up a housing management committee of the council and publish all the equivalent reports. And the alternative to all of this is to stand up to government and to lobby government for the investment that local people need. Haringey should be a campaigning council working alongside its tenants. We recommend to you the open letter from Diarmid Ward, Deputy Leader of Islington Council, calling for a government-funded rent freeze that's in the handout. And we look forward to you signing this letter alongside tenant groups as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much. And you were exactly on 3 minutes, dead on. So
I rehearsed, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we have up to 12 minutes for questions to the deputation. So this is questions from panel members to the members of the deputation. So can I ask if any panel members have got any questions for the representative to defend council housing? Councillor Hymas, welcome, by the way.
You mentioned that London affordable rent is discredited as a form of rent. Could you say more about that and what research might exist from the Mayor of London around that particular statement?
I can't speak for the Mayor of London, but I can say that when London affordable rent was introduced, the Mayor of London's office spun the most improbable and untrue tale, really, claiming that it was equivalent to social rent, claiming there was no difference, and the like. But the response to it was from tenants and from housing campaigners, and I think from local authorities as well, was to question that. I mean, I certainly went to a lot of meetings where the deputy mayor for housing, every time we mentioned unaffordable rent, we got up and said it's £60 a week more than the current rent, and so on. So basically, lobbying was done, and it was obviously effective lobbying because the mayor didn't appear to be listening. And then actually we suddenly find that the mayor has actually gone to the Tory government, again, quite improbable that they would listen, and basically they did listen. So that we then had the current iteration of the affordable housing programme in London. All the rented housing is at social rent. There is no place for London affordable rent within that, and the amount of development grants, the average amount of development grants, 50% higher than it was in the previous iteration. So they're not getting everything we want, but it just shows that lobbying actually works. We're not wasting our breath. We're not wasting our time when we do that. And we do that by acting together and focusing on the issue, not on the personality or what party they are.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any more questions? Councillor Adre.
Thank you, Paul. You talked about the lack of consultation. Have you been consulted previously when the budget is prepared in terms of housing? That's number one. And also, if you can just clarify what you mean by the fact that a number of information has been taken off of the web, which you said you'd like to be provided by the council, since obviously the Homes for Haringey no longer exists and is now part of the council's department.
Yes, there used to be an annual consultation that the council did with its tenants about the proposed rent increase and the proposed service charge. So every tenant was written to the information during the budget consultation period. The proposed service charges were published in the December meeting, so we knew what was actually being proposed. Over a period of time, this all stopped, And the last one to go, if you like, was publishing the service charge increases in December. We then had a situation where we had to put in a deputation request to go and speak to the cabinet if we thought they might be doing something that we would want to lobby them about, because they didn't tell you. And again, if you read the report, it's simply what the current position is that the council says it's simply going to notify the tenants in advance that they've got to make the payment. So that's completely unacceptable. It's discrimination against council tenants as a group of people, because every other member of the community gets consulted on the budget, and it doesn't fit at all with the council's aspirations for co-production, which we welcome. So that's that one. Yeah, the information that Homes for we called for the Homes for Haringey to be brought in-house over many years, but we wanted that to be done on the basis of no loss of their existing rights and transparencies and so on. And it is fair to say that there was a huge amount of information that was published by Homes for Haringey. You could not only go to the meetings like this, you could also read it online and ask further questions about it. It was an enormous wealth of information. So looking at fire safety in particular, it was, by reading these documents, we were able to see that the council was hitting its target for doing inspections, but when it came to the actions, there was a backlog, and the backlog was a huge backlog. It was 11,000 fire safety actions overdue. Now it's only 20,000 homes, right? So then that figure went up to 13,000. And then the Almo was closed down, it was brought in-house, and now that information has disappeared. Not only with the old stuff taken off of the web, but there is no effective mechanism put in place to have that level of transparency. So given that the council, quite rightly, is focusing very strongly on council housing, something we very much welcome. There's a house building programme which we very much welcome as well. It would be the right thing to do would be to have a housing committee of the council and publish the equivalent, at least the equivalent information that used to be there. Otherwise, quite frankly, the rhetoric about about conversations with tenants and so on just is not. That box is not being ticked. It's not being done. It's great to talk about, but we want to do it as well.
Councillor Barnes.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a bit more about your Housing Management Committee proposal. Would that basically be to replace what was the Board of Homes for Haringey, or would that be perhaps a bit more open with resident positions on there as well? And how many people would be needed to do that? And apart from publishing reports, what are the kinds of responsibilities would you want to see that committee take?
I'm not. I think that there was under the Almo, there was a degree of oversight about what management are doing, about a range of down-to-earth basic activities throughout the organisation, all these things that affect residents' lives. And it used to be standard, and we don't have it at the moment, to have a council committee that actually deals with those issues, not only receiving reports, but also discussing and making decisions. And yes, it would be very positive to have residents taking part on that. There have been many examples in the past. It's possible to co-op members and the like. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification on what you just said about that. You said the council used to have a committee that discussed these kind of housing issues. Are you talking about the time when we had the committee model for the whole council, or was it after the move to the kind of cabinet and leader model for decision making?
Yeah, before the cabinet model came in, there were housing committees, and that's obviously changed when the cabinet model comes in. But even with the cabinet model, it is possible to have a housing committee where that kind of information, which we had at the start of the year, is actually published where it should be. So the
Susan,
council can read it, tenants can read it, members of the public can read
okay,
it.
now nothing. He wanted to do it.
Could I just ask that people who are participating online keep their microphones on mute? Thank you.
And so it's really a question of an approach, isn't it? It's a question of an approach and of finding a way to do at least what was done when the Almo, existed, and to have enhanced resident involvement on that. I think Jacob would like to comment as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, Paul's put the case very well. I think the key thing is if we had a dedicated committee with agendas and minutes, yes, and resident involvement, and also, you could do deputations like this. That way, every month or however often it met, we could look at the housing issues, we could put forward things to the committee, suggestions and so on to be brought up at the committee. Councillors could discuss things, and we would have a proper, anything like, we would have proper accountability for housing and proper involvement for housing, agenda, minutes, actions. We don't seem to have that at the moment. And with the Almo, although it started out with a lot of resident involvement, it went down and down. We used to have all the panels and things like that. We could go along and talk about repairs. And I think it went down to one committee in the end. And that appears to be where we're stuck at the moment. So the resident involvement in housing has really decreased over the years, and the amount of information we can get without doing FOIs all the time, which is ridiculous. We shouldn't have to do FOIs every time we need basic information, which should be public anyway. So that is the point of this committee. It's about the minutes. We wouldn't, it's not necessarily everybody goes to every meeting, but you can read the minutes like we did with the Almo board and like we did with the housing management board and things years ago. You can read the minutes, you can see what's happening, you can see the statistics, you can read all the officers' reports, and then you can put in your deputation or your question or your inquiry. It's basic democratic accountability for council housing tenants and leaseholders.
Thank you very much. Yep, Councillor Blake.
Thanks, Chair. Just as a follow-up on that, are there any examples from other boroughs that we should be looking at? And could I suggest, Chair, maybe we could request officers to come back at a future meeting with some of those other models from elsewhere? Thanks.
So the question was, are you aware of any other boroughs where similar arrangements like those that you're suggesting are in place?
Swindon is one, Cambridge is one. These are two boroughs that for a long period of time have had housing committees where tenant representatives take part. And these are people who are critical of the council. The other thing that's really important is not just to have a group of people who you talk to, but a group of people you actually seriously engage with, that are prepared to speak out and thrash out issues. This means but everybody gets a better deal. We don't want to be campaigning in the dark and getting things wrong and making mistakes. We want to be talking to officers and councillors so that we know what you know, and then we can work together to improve things. So I would suggest looking at Swindon and Cambridge.
Thanks for that. Councillor Hymas, one. Oh, okay, I'll take two questions. I'll take them together because we're nearing the end of time for questions. So Councillor Hymas, if you ask your question, then I'll take Councillor Ajay, and I'll ask you to answer them both together. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's really important to increase tenant voice. I think I can't emphasize that enough. And I know that on the environment and community safety panel, we have a voice from the community there, a non-councillor, and I think that's something that as a committee we could look at. I guess my main question is what democratic accountability is there? I think it's important that if we did have a tenant representative, that it wasn't someone who was handpicked by the council, say, but someone who could have some legitimacy and authority to talk on behalf of tenants. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we could best implement that going forward.
Great. You made a point about London affordable rent being withdrawn by the Mayor of London. Have you spoken to the cabinet member here about it? Or let me rephrase it. Have you brought it to the attention of the relevant cabinet member in terms of London affordable rent that you said it's been withdrawn by the Mayor of London?
Okay, two questions.
Yeah, okay. the question of having individuals coming to forums is one way of doing things. Its most important thing is to have engagement that's wide open, that's really wide open. So things like the service charges, we're being refused consultation on £12 million in the service charge budget. Now, service charges are a rip-off, right? Anybody who buys a product in the marketplace and then finds that they end up with a bill that's a lot bigger than they thought they were getting because there are service charges on top is being ripped off. Right now, there are loads of tenants and residents who have lots of things to say about that, but we don't have anything to say about it when we don't get the information and when we're being refused consultation. That's what's happening at the moment. And you know, I wrote to the leader Perret about this. I'll copy the letter to all councillors. You know, the 10 days when we normally expect a reply have passed. And no reply has been forthcoming, as far as I know. This is the kind of stuff which we are facing, and it simply needs to change. There needs to be a change of approach about that. On the second question about London affordable rent and the cabinet members, I really haven't spoken personally with the cabinet members about London affordable rent, but I think they know as perfectly well that London affordable rent is being withdrawn. And I would also like to say that it's been just finish by saying that's been a great victory for us, a great victory for the tenants movement, a great victory for councils like Haringey who held on to social rent during that whole period when it wasn't supposed to exist, it wasn't supposed to be viable, etc., etc. You know, don't let's throw it away now, which is what's happening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's now for a response to be provided to Haringey Defend Council Housing in writing from the committee, from the panel rather. So for now, I'd just like to thank you very much for coming along this evening. And you're of course free to leave if you want to, or to stay and it's not my understanding of the council constitution is that a deputation to a body is responded to by the chair of that body. Now, what I was going to suggest, because what I didn't want to turn this into was a long back and forth. What I wanted to suggest is that the points that have been raised by Paul and Jacob, particularly those related to the budget, we can feed into our budget discussion later on. And if panel members want to raise those issues with you as cabinet members, then they'll be free to do that at that point on the agenda. But in terms of the response that is provided, I will of course liaise with you in order to, in putting that response together.
Sorry, if I could just come in, because I think it's important following the discussion in this group, and I appreciate that the response is to the delegation, but I also would like to respond to the members of the panel who have raised concerns about two matters. But primarily,
could you keep it brief then, please?
Sorry.
That's okay, if you could keep it fairly brief.
I will keep them brief, yes. So first of all, we will be discussing the budget later, but for clarity, we can come to that. We can come to that point later. However, I would like to address the matter of the governance arrangements following the insourcing of Homes for Haringey into the council, and I fully appreciate, and obviously it was a concern, that that by bringing Homes for Haringey into the council, it would become part of the council and not have the same housing focus and the same access that one would have on a board, and that was obviously one of my concerns. However, what the position that we're in at the moment is a transition position, because the governance, the final governance models that are being put in place will need to include cabinet reports and quite probably a change to the constitution. At this present point in time, we have the customer call group, which is made up of residents, which feeds in. We also have what was the resident scrutiny panel and is now the housing resident advisory panel. We will also be having an improvement board, which will have residents on it, sitting on it, and which will hopefully feed into this committee. But you need to be assured that as a housing service, what is important to officers and to myself is that all information is openly and freely available, and that so that it can be scrutinized, and that further governance models are in the process of being designed and put in place. So this is purely a transitionary position at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, all right. I'm really sorry, but we can't have a back and forth now because we've reached the end of the time for this item. Oh, okay, right. So as I was saying, thank you very much for coming, and you are perfectly welcome to stay and listen to our discussion on the rest of the agenda items, of course. Okay, and I will liaise with cabinet members and officers to provide a response to what the deputation has brought to us today. Okay, thank you very much. Right. Oh, just to note that there were a couple of suggestions made by panel members. I think Councillor Hymas made a suggestion about whether we should be looking at adding co-optees to the panel, as some of the other panels have. So maybe we can think about that in future, about maybe who could be a voice of residents on the panel as co-optees. I think that's certainly something worth looking at. And Councillor Blake was asking if we could ask officers about the feasibility of setting up the kind of, but this sounds like the kind of conversation that we, Councillor Carlin was just talking about with Defend Council Housing. So maybe we should have further discussions and keep an eye on what these kind of reporting arrangements and involvement of residents are in housing matters. So just to note that. All right. Thank you very much. Right, next item is the minutes of our meeting on the 1st of November. These are for approval. Does anyone have any issues about the accuracy of the minutes? Are we therefore happy to approve them? Okay. They're therefore approved. Thank you very much. Right.
I would just like to, there was an action point from the previous in the minutes about the improvement plan. So I would just like to advise the committee that the improvement plan at the moment, at the moment, in terms of the improvement plan, officers have identified a number of priorities which to concentrate on. One of those would be voids. As I'm sure you're aware, that's really important for a number of reasons. So that's a priority going forward. Complaints will be a priority, and income management. Also, repairs and planned maintenance is a priority, and compliance. And at the moment, as I'm sure you know, damp and mold. These are will be formalised. There's a meeting in February, and all members meeting about the improvement plan, and a board is going, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be set up, which will hopefully include residents and will feed into this panel with details of the improvements so that it can be monitored. Everything will be very strictly project managed to ensure improvement in the service. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay. Councillor Ajay.
Thanks, Chair. Because it's cold, I didn't want to raise any issues on that. But since you mentioned it, it's just when are you likely to provide us with that information? Because the minutes does say you would provide us with information, not necessarily, well, useful, the verbal stuff in terms of prioritization. But when are you likely to do it? Is that in February or prior to February in terms of the information that's been requested? Thanks.
Well, when is the next meeting of this committee? Yes, so we will be able to definitely feed in on the 20 at that meeting with a proper report. Okay, thank you. So if we could, if possible, we'll bring a report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No more points on the minutes then? No. Okay. Right. So next item is housing repairs performance. Judith, are you introducing this report, or well, I'll let you decide between Councillor Carlin and Judith who's going to introduce the report.
Hi, I will introduce the report, and then Judith and myself can take further questions. As the report says, and as is acknowledged, there's a considerable amount of improvement that's still needed to take place in the housing repairs service to reach the standards that we expect and need. I'll take it that most people have read the report, and you'll see the timeline at the beginning about some of the matters that have affected our repairs service within, really going back to early 2020. Another major issue in terms of our repairs is the fact that our housing stock is old and needs a lot of work generally. So together with repairs, we also need to emphasize our major works program over the next 10 years, 8 to 10 years, to bring our housing stock up to the required levels. If there are, I'll take it as the report is read because it has quite a lot of detailed information I'm not going to go through, but if there are questions, then we're happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I just had a couple initially, just a couple of questions or clarification on the report. Just on the first page, the schematic under 1.1, looking at the bottom of that, June 2021, it says first says lockdown comes to an end, and I don't know if this is a misprint. It just then says repair service comes to an end. What was meant? What was that meant to say?
Service came to an end because we were running off a emergency plus service up until June. So yeah, we didn't quite finish it then.
Okay, that's great. So can we just note that, because this is a public document and people might get the wrong idea. So if we could just note in the minutes that that's not what's being said, that there was suddenly no repair service at all. And then the second point was just a little bit further down in the report, paragraph 2.3. It talks about the majority of jobs are made by phone, and then it says there's a limited digital offer. It just didn't seem clear to me what that meant. Limited in what way? What's limiting the digital offer?
Sorry, it literally goes into an inbox in the call centre. So if you think you're raising a repair online actually what it does is it doesn't raise it, it just raises an email. So, so obviously a good digital offer would be an interactive digital offer where you could book and track your repairs online. At the moment, it just actually goes to the same place where the same people are dealing with it. It just is in an inbox.
Right, okay, that makes sense. Okay, thanks. Okay, do panel members have questions on this report? Okay, I'm going to go first of all to Councillor Harrison and Mullane because she hasn't asked a question yet.
Hi, I think the KPI information is really useful, but I was just wondering, we've got information at 3.2 about appointments made and appointments kept, but there's no information in the report about how long people are waiting for that first report, and whether we're meeting expectations on that, which I think would be really useful and relevant information to have here.
I'll ask Judith to come in on, I mean, I'll just say that obviously sometimes there'll be different levels of priority. So that also might be the reason, because, you know, if the priorities, well, certainly the priorities I've asked for to be priorities are matters where it's dangerous, and also where not dealing with it will cause consequential damage, such as leaks. But then there'll be other repairs that are easy to, so I think it's also partly to do with that, but Judith will come in.
So actually one of the improvements we're looking to make is to clearly publish the repairs standard, so people actually know how long they're expected to wait for a repair to be completed. And we've just upgraded or just in the process of upgrading our internal system, which has an insight module into it, because I agree that is a piece of data we should have. And actually at the moment we don't, it's not reported through our in-house team. So we're actually getting the insight module of our repairs system, which will enable us to report on that much more transparently than we do currently, because at the moment it's quite a manual process to get that data out. But I completely agree, we should be reporting on average percentage of jobs completed within timescale for each category should be reported on. And at the moment we don't report the full set of data in the way I would like to.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Barnes is next.
Thank you. I know that you've got some quite major changes happening within the housing coming in-house. What I'd be really interested in is a time frame as to how that's going to happen and when that's going to happen, because it's quite a lot of change I think you want to introduce, which is for the good in terms of repairs particularly. And I think it'd be useful for us to see what that proposed schedule is. Partly it should be communicated very clearly to residents, and partly I'm sure the panel would like to monitor that and see where there might be problems, as well as opportunities.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. What we're really talking about is partly the improvement plan, and that will have it will be properly project managed, so that is going to have timescales to measure against, and so we will be expected. The service will be expected to meet those timescales, and that will all be quite transparent if it's not happening. I think that's really important. I mean, some of what we're having to do is that when we insourced Homes for Haringey, and in the period before insourcing, we've lost a lot of staff at kind of middle management level, and so that it's also about rebuilding the service up now. So it's an improvement on a lot of different criteria, and not just in terms of specific repairs, but it's actually improving the whole of the service so that it's robust, that we have the right staff in place, we have the right finances, the right systems, have the right online systems, etc. And one of the things I didn't mention in terms of the improvement plan, if you can make a note, that running across everything is also communication with residents. So getting that all completely improved. So for example, as Judith said, at the moment, housing services, when you contact housing services, people are reporting repairs, they're not actually reporting repairs to the service. They're speaking to people in the contact centre. It's come to my knowledge that the emails that we're talking about have a backlog of about a month, or certainly a certain amount of time, because somebody furiously responded and said, you didn't respond to my email for a month, and now you're just telling me you're sending it to the service. So all of these things have to be improved, both council services that are dealing with housing matters and the housing service itself. So it's a lot of improvement to do. As I've said, we will be prioritising certain really critical matters as early as possible, and bringing in the governance structures as well.
So I think my question really is when we'll be able to see that schedule, because I know it can't all be done like that, and I'm not asking for that, but it'd be nice to have that timeline that we can all see here as well. Would that be ready by the end of January, for example?
We've said we'll bring a report to the meeting in February, and they, as I've said, ideally what I would envisage, with the chair's permission, obviously would be that the improvement board would report into this committee, so that Scrutiny would also be scrutinising the improvement plan. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, I suppose we're talking about providing the report for the meeting, but we could easily receive the report as members of the committee outside the meeting. We don't necessarily need to make it an item on the agenda of the meeting, if you get my drift.
As I've said, officers are working on the report. They have identified the areas of priority, and they're working on the actual project planning of it. It will be ready in terms of February. It is going to an all-member briefing in February, which is why coming to this committee in February is the sensible time for it to be reported forward. Thank you.
Okay, we'll look forward to receiving that then. Okay, Councillor Moyd, you had a question.
Sorry, if I could just add to this. David has reminded me. Going back to our what I've just discussed in terms of recruitment, we have the operational director of housing services will be starting at the beginning of January, as will the assistant director of housing management. So it's also important for them to be fully engaged with, and they will need to get up to speed, which is why February is the right time going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, Councillor Moyd.
Yeah, I'm just looking at paragraph 2.5. It talks about there are 100 to 120 complaints and members' inquiries that we receive in relation to repairs, and which constitutes 2.5% of repair jobs. And the report says that this is not the standard to which we want to be. So 0.5% should be less than 0.5%. The complaint level for it to constitute good performance. So I want to understand, and just frankly, the figure 2.5% or 100 to 120 complaints, it doesn't seem, I mean, in reality, it seems a lot more, because when we go to council surgeries, when we receive emails, that seems to dominate. But you're saying overall is 100 to 120 complaints or members' inquiries a month. The impression that we get is a lot more, but even that's, according to the report, is not good enough. You know, it should be less than 0.5%, and that is 2.5%. So I want to understand what we're doing to reduce it to less than 0.5%.
Well, I'll let Judith come in, but it's absolutely not good enough. And unfortunately, one of the problems is that the cases that come to councillors and they come in as complaints are normally, not 100%, but normally will be cases where things have gone quite seriously wrong. So by the time it comes to members' inquiries or comes to the complaint system, there's a catalogue of errors of the reason why something's gone wrong. Well, there's a catalogue of errors, but there are also difficulties that the service has had in terms of supply chain, which means outside contractors, etc. But Judith will explain to you in a little bit more detail about that. Thank you.
So one of the changes that we're looking to introduce, because I actually also agree that it's not good enough that many complaints are being escalated and issues, and as Councillor Carlin has said, they tend to be the more complex cases, so the ones that are impacting most heavily on residents. So we are at the moment making a change to introduce a complex case team. So once something gets to the point where it has more than 4 repairs, sort of more than 4 jobs needed as part of that repair, we are currently in the process of finalising the recruitment to get people in to manage those cases through. Partly to make sure all those jobs run smoothly, and when someone's been in, we know that the follow-on job has been booked, but also actually to make sure that we are communicating with the residents. And I think probably you're all aware as councillors that a lot of the complex complaints we get are about damp coming from other properties and neighbouring properties. So we're coordinating access arrangements to try and identify. I mean, we've got a block at the moment, Stella House, where we've literally gone into, I think, 18 flats to try and identify the source of the leak. And found 3 different leaks within the property that have been impacting, but that's an enormous amount of coordination just to deal with that. So we're looking at changing our approach where we get cases like that we're dealing with a much more casework management way of doing it than just dealing with it as a sort of transactional repair, because we recognise it may be about access to a neighbour's property, and it may be one of the areas I think we're quite clear that really needs to be better at things like the follow-on work. So quite often we'll stop the leak, but then we won't go back and necessarily do the plastering and the decoration in a timely fashion, which is the frustration that residents have. So that's the real bit we want to make a change to, about really getting people to own those cases, communicate with residents if we're waiting for a part, that they're making sure that's diarised and they're chasing up and knowing that that's happened. So hasn't happened at the moment, but I think we've been doing a lot of analysis in the last 6 months, and that's a real key area where it takes us a lot of time, it takes you all a lot of time, and it's probably the biggest driver of resident dissatisfaction. So we really want to home in on doing that piece of work really differently when we've got complex repair.
Can I just add one point as well? I think there's a wider point around the culture of responding to complaints and the council as a whole, but something that we definitely need to build on in housing, which is picking up the phone and talking to the resident and saying, what is the ideal resolution for you? You know, even during the course of this meeting, I've received a case where there must have been about 14 opportunities to do that, and it just keeps escalating through the system. So we need to get better at kind of picking up the phone and just saying, like, you know, that complaint is about a fence panel, so it shouldn't take the amount of time it's taken that resident to chase that down. And I think we just need to really kind of instill that culture throughout the service.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah, yep, sure.
Yeah. Just on that, on the complaints and stuff, and there have been occasions where we've, as a council, I've raised something and it got dealt with, and the resident's very happy. And it gives the impression that you need a councillor to intervene for something to get done, or in the minds of that particular individual, they'll think, okay, it was because the councillor sent an email and it got fixed, which is not very helpful, and they shouldn't need a councillor to intervene. So are repairs sometimes being dealt with in that way, that, you know, it's not prioritised, but it is suddenly prioritised and it gets done when there is an email from a councillor?
I think sometimes when we get councillor queries in, we are made aware of service failure that needs to be addressed. So I think sometimes councillor intervention does result in that. And I think that feeds back into my earlier point, is we've not got enough insight into where we are at the moment in the service. So we're not identifying service failures early enough. And I also support David's point that actually the culture change that needs to happen about talking to residents and actively phoning people, that disconnect at the moment, which we're working really hard on between the call centre and the service, needs a much greater sort of interaction for us to be able to identify, because quite often people just talk to the call centre, so they're not getting that feedback necessarily because the call centre don't have the information to provide to the resident. Whereas if we're identifying our service failures earlier, hopefully having less service failures, but if there is one, that we're identifying it earlier and actively communicating, that should stop that need for councillors to intervene. But I'd like to say it wasn't the case, but I do find that sometimes councillors do bring our attention to things that isn't on our radar or in the way it should be.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ajay, you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's just a follow-up on that. I mean, I've got loads of cases, obviously, where you put it in and you'll be notified in 10 days' time. They've logged it, but what I'm looking for really, in terms of it's a system whereby the job is being done and the member gets feedback rather than waiting for the tenant to come back to the member to say it's not been fixed. And it repeats itself several times. Obviously not necessarily here, but maybe something that should be looked at, because it is very frustrating that you report something, you think it's been fixed, but it hasn't been fixed, and it comes back and back and back, and then the customer service people logs it and give you a different reference number, so it's not working. I mean, there was an email from one of the officers saying, well, doesn't the councillor know what to do? I've logged it, and I've given a response, and it's coming back again. It's not been fixed, so if it's fixed, why would I come back? Or why would the tenant come back? It's something that we should look at collectively. I'm not trying to blame anyone here. The system is broken, but let's look at a way of fixing it. I think the sooner we fix it, the better.
There are two issues here. First of all, obviously the problem in the service, that when something comes through as a member's inquiry and or as a complaint for that matter, and the service is notified of that and says it will fix it, it needs to fix it. But the other issue that we're having as well with complaints and members' inquiries is that when it is then raised again, and what will then happen is that somebody in members' inquiry starts a new members' inquiries on it, and I've had a few of those recently, as I've said, come past me, and that's to do with the system. This is to do with our internal computer systems, that we're not actually holding the information in properly across the council generally. So yes, that is being looked at as an improvement.
Okay, thank you very much. So thanks, our members, for the questions. Thank you very much, Judith, for helping answer them. Okay, so next item on the agenda for this evening is scrutiny of the draft 2023-24 budget. So we've got quite a long report, but I think there are certain parts of that report that we, as the housing scrutiny panel, should be focusing on. So who is going to be introducing this report? John.
Hello. Good
Welcome,
evening.
John O'Keefe.
Thank you.
You're going to introduce the report this evening for us, are you? Thank you very much, and then members will presumably have questions. Thanks.
Okay. Firstly, I'd just like to start. You've got an agenda item 8 this evening, which is a summary report of the cabinet report that was considered last week. And I think that's, from the point of view of what you're scrutinising, that gives a helpful summary of the overall position. To be attached to this report is the actual report that was considered by cabinet last week, and which is your Appendix D. Appendix C provides new revenue budget proposals and the new revenue growth, previously agreed MTF savings, and some details of new capital investment proposals. And then finally, the Appendix G gives you a list of all of the capital schemes. So this report has gone out, it now goes out of a consultation. The results of that consultation plus any changes that are required, and I'll come on to those in a second, will be again considered by Cabinet in February, and it will make recommendations to Council as to what it's going to do. So within Cabinet proposals, we have draft proposals in relation to the General Fund revenue and capital budgets. We have draft proposals in relation to the HRA revenue and capital proposals and its business plan. The report notes that at the moment, there is a gap between the council's projected expenditure and projected income of around about 3.1 million. That's after, I should say, the application of £5.5 million of one-off measures that were there. So the intention is that once we've got to further understanding around levies, around the local government finance settlement and a whole raft of other issues, we will obviously be presenting a balanced budget to Cabinet, because to do otherwise would be unlawful. So the budget in general, it allows for growth, and this was due to largely undeliverable savings in directorates, and that's contained in the main body of the report. The report puts forward new savings for placemaking and housing, and bearing in mind that certain of the savings will be directly attributable to David Joyce's directorate, but other of the savings will be attributable to the adults directorate, which would be around housing demand. So we have this split of directorates, which you have in the programmes here. The report also provides proposals in relation to the council's, as I say, council's capital programme. The point that we'd like to make about the capital programme is the council is still investing and continues to invest, but it's becoming increasingly costly. As you will all know from personal experience, interest rates have gone up. So just like anybody who has debt, the council suffers as well, because the cost of its debt goes up, and the actual cost of the things that it's buying in the capital programme are going up because of inflation. What that's doing is obviously making it much more difficult for the self-financing schemes that we have to generate sufficient savings so that they can actually proceed. There's a lot of self-financing schemes in the capital programme. That's making that difficult. On the plus side, the programme has been reviewed to ensure that the zero carbon requirements are met as far as possible, and that again is listed in the report. And finally, page 87 has details of all the new General Fund Capital Programme proposals. So that's what I want to say by way of introduction to where we are. And I would draw your attention to the fact that you have savings and growth proposals in appendices 3, 2 and 3, which would probably be the focus of your scrutiny, along with the capital programme proposals.
Thank you very much for that, John. I'm just wondering if either of the Cabinet members have any initial comments to make before we proceed to the discussion. Councillor Gordon? No. Councillor Carlin? No. Okay. I guess we have different bits of this report on which we might have questions. So having had a look through the report myself, I see that there's a section 9 of the Cabinet report, pages 62 to 72, has quite a lengthy discussion on the housing revenue account. It's possible that we might have questions on those. Then from page 79 to 81, we've got a list of new savings proposals. And then towards the end of the report, from about page 87, we've got discussion of the capital programme. So I'm wondering if it might make sense for us to divide our discussion in that way, and see if members have questions, like kind of concentrate our questions on each of those areas before moving on to the next area. Is that okay? Yeah. Happy with that? Okay. So shall we start with the savings proposals? I know that's not the first part in the report, but I think that's kind of what we traditionally focus on in this round, is the savings proposals. So they're on pages 79 to 81 of the report. So do any members other than myself have any questions on this evening's proposals? Councillor Hymas, you got your hand in first.
Thank you. I think the first question I had was around the extended. Sorry, not that part. It was about the proposal to basically targeting families that have been in temporary accommodation for a significant number of years. It talks about targeted casework and removing any barriers to moving on from temporary accommodation. I wonder if you could say what you think those barriers are, because my understanding is that the main barrier is that they can't afford the private rented sector. So that then looks like pushing people out of the borough. So I'm wondering if you could clarify that.
Thanks for that. So this is AHC Saving 009, targeting families that have been TA for a significant number of years.
Yes, that's
Yes.
the one.
I did, yeah. So if we can just fold into that, I had a question about that as well. So maybe if we fold those in together,
Yes,
because
yeah.
I wondered if these people have been in TA for such a significant number of years that actually these are people that the council accepted a housing duty to prior to the council being able to discharge its housing duty into the private sector. So these are actually people who the council can legally only discharge our housing duty by providing them with a council home, effectively. Is that correct? So in that case, I wanted to check, and just if we can just go in with Councillor Hymas's question. I just wanted to check that these people, what we're not planning to do, or ask whether what we are planning to do is to kind of persuade them to give up that right and to accept something in the private sector.
No, that's completely correct. These long-term, we have about, at the last count it was about 500, I think, around that figure. I can get the exact figure for you. Of households who've been in temporary accommodation for a very long time, sometimes for over 20 years. And they are of households that we have accepted a duty to, and we do have to provide them with homes with permanent accommodation. The thing is that they have been in temporary accommodation for a very long time, and they're in a community, they live where they live, they're very happy often in their temporary accommodation. There hasn't been a great need, or a great desire rather, for them to move into permanent accommodation. But obviously this costs us money, because the rent may not be covered fully, because the amount of housing benefit that you can get for temporary accommodation is 10% lower than the LHA rate. So there's a shortfall in terms of what they can claim, and if their own benefits don't cover the rent, we make up the difference. Our temporary accommodation bill is eye-watering, as it is for a lot of other authorities, and it is reduced by the discretionary housing grant, which is being reconsidered by the government, which puts us in a very fragile and risky position going forward. Haringey gets one of the highest grants in the country, and so so again, this puts us in a difficult position. So in terms of encouraging them to move, this is a piece of work where officers will work with their family to try to find them accommodation that they will move into, and with the aim of assisting them to bid, or sometimes providing a direct offer of accommodation. This in no way is going to mean that they will be moved into private sector accommodation. That's not what this proposal is. But by moving homeless households from temporary accommodation into our permanent stock, this will save us money, which is why it's part of the MTF savings. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Hymas wants to come back on that.
So when you say direct offer, would that effectively mean you'd say that some of those families who've been in temporary accommodation for a long time could jump the queue based on existing priority need?
They've been in temporary accommodation, some of them for over 20 years. They have very high levels of priority on the allocation system already, but they're not necessarily bidding for homes. I mean, we've had situations where long-term households have refused accommodation in our new build housing stock. They are happy where they're living, some of them, and they don't necessarily want to move. But this is temporary accommodation, and we do need them to move into secured council tenancies, or into, no, if I can correct that, into social tenancies. Because they won't always necessarily, it will be within what's on offer, but it would be suitable for them, might be a housing association property. But we do need them to move into social housing, basically, and out of temporary accommodation. Thank you.
And just to follow up further on this, if one of these families, so under normal circumstances, they would be expected to bid, but some of them haven't been bidding. But if we're saying we're making them, considering making them direct offers, what happens in the circumstances that a direct offer like that is made and is refused? Are there any consequences in terms of saying, well, you know, you've refused an offer, therefore the duty to house you has now ended?
In terms of direct offers, this is not necessarily in terms of people who are already sitting in temporary accommodation and have a home. This is not something that's undertaken lightly. And at the moment, people can just have been refusing direct offers. But like other authorities, we need to actually come up with a proper policy around how many offers households can refuse. We do need to reduce our temporary accommodation bill. It's hugely risky to us as an authority. And what you have to remember is that, as you can see this in this paper, this is money that is coming directly out of the revenue account, and it's millions of pounds. And if the discretionary housing payment reduces, it will be more. Thank you.
Just one point to add to that. I think one of the reasons Councillor Carlin's right to say it's really risky to the authority is that year after year the government keep promising us that they will give us a longer term financial settlement around the grant that we receive. But year after year they then disappoint and give us a 1 year settlement sort of 1 or 2 months before the start of the next financial year, which makes it really difficult for colleagues in finance to do proper financial planning for the authority, because obviously, you know, while we hope and work closely with the government departments to try and get certainty that we'll get the level of funding we've had in the current year, we can't rely on that. So it does leave us in a difficult position.
Okay, thanks. I should have said this at the start of our discussion, but just a reminder to panel members that where we want to be at the end of this discussion is we want to be making some recommendations to the cabinet about the budget. So we need to get some good quality recommendations. So just think about what we want to be saying at the end when we're making our recommendations. Do we have any recommendations on this particular saving, on the next savings? So feel free to say that during the discussion, or we can come back to it at the end. Okay. Does anybody have any further questions on this specific saving? Councillor Barnes.
Sorry, do you mean in general? I'm looking at P&H save 001. So not the one we've just discussed, but it's still in the same
If
section.
nobody else, I mean, I was just trying to structure the discussion, but if nobody has any other questions on that specific saving,
Okay.
then go on, Councillor.
Well, just in terms, it just seems like a lot of money that we're saving through this saving. So I'm just wondering how that calculation was arrived at, and maybe that would be something we could seek a bit more clarification in as part of a recommendation.
It's not actually such a lot of money. In actual fact, in terms of our cost of temporary accommodation, the cost of temporary accommodation to this borough is eye-watering. Okay, it's over 10 million. So, as I've said, it is reduced by the fact that we get the housing discretionary, the homelessness discretionary grant. But as David has said, this is a yearly payment, and the government is reconsidering it. We're expecting it to go down. Every single time it goes down, it is actually quite eye-watering, but if you think about like 3,000 households, I had to do the math, 3,000 households with this shortage of £100 a month, and then you just kind of multiply that up, and you've got millions of pounds. You just suddenly realize that, oh, £100 a month, £1,000, even if you say £1,000 a year, 3,000 times 1,000, it's like 3 million. So the amount of money, it's an extraordinary amount of money, and it's coming straight out of the revenue account. So I can ask officers to give you a breakdown, but it's actually not an ambitious target. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just a question then on how many families would expect to be moved in a year into social housing from their temporary accommodation?
Okay, great. So if we could just get that more kind of detailed breakdown of how many.
Yeah, we can give that in writing. We'll give a more detailed briefing.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Barnes had a question on different savings, and sorry,
Yeah,
apologies. Casey had something to add.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Watt. I just quickly wanted to come into that point. The assumption behind that amount is about 180 a year. And if you multiply that with the average assumption we have for spend on a year, you find out that it's quite a modest figure that was put in there. So it's 180 per year. So that's the assumption that we'll be able to move about 180 next year and 180 the other year. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, right, Councillor Barnes, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. It was around the P&H saving 001, and it's the larger part of that, which is the 100,000, about increasing planning application fees by 35% for minor apps and 25% for major. Have we seen, or do we think we might see, a reduction in planning applications as the cost of living hits and people don't, or developers don't want to make big changes? I think there'll be some people that might have been moving and therefore will be more likely to apply to extend their property. But are we confident that 100,000 is about right there? Could it be an underestimation or an overestimation?
I'll ask Rob to come in on that. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Councillor. So going forward, we can look back, looking at COVID, we had a big increase in residential applications because people were thinking about their home and being home-based more than in the workplace. So we had that increase. So that may well continue at a high level. So that's based on that. The projection we've got in here is actually more about an expected government national increase in planning fees. So assuming that applications stay at the same level, and they might go up, they might go down, assuming that the number of applications stay at the same level, this is about an increase in fees that will be set nationally, and we would therefore get the expected income from that. But in terms of whether that will change, I can really only go on the past forecast. Really, We haven't seen any levelling off yet in terms of the economy or the post-COVID effects. We're still seeing a large amount of residential applications. So that's what this is based on. We're confident this is a good estimation, and we obviously monitor that on a regular basis to make sure that the forecast is robust. So this is our best estimation that we've got so far.
Thanks. Or did you want to come back? No. Councillor Harris, did you have a question, Councillor Harris was saying? Lane, sorry, yes, please go ahead.
So also about that same budget line, I know there's an expected saving due to additional income from the Proceeds of Crime Act where enforcement cases are successful. I just wanted to ask, is there anything proactive that we're doing linked to that saving around enforcement and what's happening?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. So we're working jointly with our colleagues who deal with sort of wider fraud issues to do with council tax and things like that, who will also need to use what's called a financial investigator, so that when there are cases of breaches of enforcement or so on found, we can then investigate if proceeds of crime have arisen and do that. So yes, there's a piece of proactive work where we're working with other parts of the council to bring those forwards, and just purely in the planning enforcement world as well. Yeah, we have a planning enforcement team, and most of their job is proactively getting out there, looking for cases, as well as responding to cases from residents. And we do always keep a lookout for cases where there might be proceeds of crime, and then we can seek to get significant income from that. So yes, there's quite a lot of proactive work on some of that. And actually, as the recent week of action in Wood Green, our planning enforcement team have been out and about looking at cases as well proactively. So yeah, absolutely key on that. I don't know if Councillor Colin wanted to add anything on planning enforcement, but she certainly sort of keeps us challenged on making sure we're proactive in terms of planning enforcement. Thank you.
Yes, as Rob has said, I'm very I don't know if keen's the right word, but I would like to see us as an authority ensuring that we do enforce robustly when developments go ahead without planning permission, or when planning permission isn't complied with.
Thanks. Okay, I can't see any more hands at the moment. I had a question on AHC saving 07, which was the use of one-bed social housing as temporary accommodation. I just wanted to be reassured a bit, given the you know, what we've seen with the consequences of overcrowding in terms of, like, you know, damp and mold and all this kind of stuff, that what we're going to do to prevent this move from causing overcrowding, especially given that, you know, families with one child can quite quickly grow. So I don't know, Councillor Carlin, have you got anything to say on this?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, we are redesigning our allocations policy, which, because at the moment, a family that becomes, because of the way we have a banding system based on effective date, the family becomes more overcrowded. They have to be very seriously overcrowded before they get into band B. And then they're going to be sitting probably with an effective date so far back they're not going to move. So our allocation policy is going to allow us to map individual need and fine-tune really carefully where we need to prioritise households moving. Another proposal in terms of larger properties and in terms of overcrowded properties is where it's possible. Judith has policies where we're going to be looking at doing things like loft conversions and back extensions. So trying to increase the size of our own housing stock, so that if households are overcrowded, both for people to move into, but also households that are overcrowded. We're looking at a lot of our overcrowded families have adult children. So it's looking at whether we can have an offer. A lot of boroughs have an offer towards adult children who within their stock to possibly move them to one bed. So that's something that we're looking at, considering. So there are a number of proposals, plus obviously our house building program, which is prioritizing providing more of the larger properties that we actually need. It is hugely problematic. Haringey historically has an oversupply of one-bedroom properties, and when somebody moves into a one-bedroom property, they very often don't stay as a single person or a couple in that property, and it ends up that we have larger families in one or two bedroom properties. This is a long-standing historic problem within the borough that we have to tackle, and we have to tackle as well because, as you said, this also has implications in terms of condensation damp, because if you have severe overcrowding, it's very difficult. It's not just the number of people in the property, but also their belongings. So they can't move, families can't move everything away from the walls. The property is simply not big enough to move things away from walls and to leave clear space, just in terms of what they need to live with and the number of people in the properties. It is hugely problematic. So we're doing everything that we can as quickly as we can. But there's not going to be a short-term fix, unfortunately, because it's a long-term problem. Thank you.
Councillor Moy, do you have a follow-up on this? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on this. So I think, look, we're talking about temporary accommodation. Temporary accommodation doesn't actually mean temporary. It means lots and lots of years, sometimes more than 10 years. So if we are placing families that have a baby, so it could be a couple, husband and a wife and a baby, 3 people into one bed as temporary accommodation, and that child could grow and become 10, 12 years old, 15 years old, depending on what age they go in. So are we saying that we put 3 people, 4 people into a one bed, and first of all, so if you're not saying that for such a long period of time, even the plan that we have in front of us to increase doing this from 10 to 15 to 30 in the coming years, yeah, I don't understand how we could justify this, because we're putting people into overcrowded situations to begin with.
Okay, so when you talk about putting people into a one-bedroom property, they will be a one-bedroom property with a bedroom, with a living room, etc. So we couldn't put people into an overcrowded position. We can't, because legally, the duty in terms of, sorry, I misspoke earlier. I was speaking about permanent accommodation, but the duty is slightly different. In terms of temporary accommodation, there is an ongoing duty, and there's recent case law upholding this, that there is an ongoing duty to ensure that accommodation is suitable. And that's a legal duty. So if a household moves into a property and has more children, and this was actually about what the most recent case was about, has more children, and then the property becomes unsuitable, we can't legally leave them there. We actually legally have to move them, because we have a duty to ensure the duty in terms of suitability is ongoing. So what is suitable for you now, if that becomes unsuitable for you, whether it's to do with affordability or whether it's to do with overcrowding or anything else, if that temporary accommodation becomes unsuitable, we are no longer fulfilling our duty to provide suitable accommodation. We have to move the household. And that's very difficult because as I've spoken about before, we have a critical shortage of accommodation to use as temporary accommodation. What this will do, this proposal, is that at the moment, these proposals, although they will generate savings, they are also there because it is imperative for us as an authority to secure as much accommodation out of that we own or we control as possible to use as temporary accommodation, both in terms of the costs, but also because we are not able at the moment to secure enough temporary accommodation in the private sector. And the results of that are that we have families at the moment in Ilford in a hotel. This is not something that we can countenance going forward. So while this will save us money, it will also mean that we increase what we can, we increase the stock of accommodation that we can use in borough to keep people in borough, children going to school, people able to get to work in their communities. This is really, really important. And if you speak to homeless families, this is what they want. They really want to stay in borough. They really want to stay in their local networks with their children at local schools.
Councillor Moyd wants to come back, but you just said something. I just wanted to get some clarity on something you just said about families being housed in hotel in Ilford. Because my understanding was that hotels are only supposed to be used for emergency accommodation pre-assessment. So are we? Could you just respond? Are we keeping people in hotels post-assessment?
No, I'm talking about emergency accommodation, but unfortunately, we have such a shortage of accommodation that our emergency accommodation in Haringey is full, and then we can't move people from our emergency accommodation in borough, and therefore we're having to source emergency accommodation wherever we can find it. This is not a position that we want to be in, and the service is under a huge amount of strain to actually try and source temporary emergency, both temporary emergency accommodation and long-term temporary accommodation. Temporary accommodation is hugely problematic. We're not the only borough in London facing this. This is a London-wide problem, and all boroughs are facing this at the moment.
I mean, I get the problem, and obviously I really appreciate your efforts and the efforts of officers to find solutions to that problem. But we do need to be quite clear that we're being clear what we're talking about, because the saving is not about emergency accommodation; it's about temporary accommodation. But you are using as justification families being housed in a hotel in Ilford, but that's emergency accommodation. So we're not talking about the same thing. We need to be clear.
Yes, but nothing operates in isolation. So we have households in our lodges, for example. Now our lodges should only be used as emergency accommodation, okay? But unfortunately, and this is lawful, we are having to keep people in our lodges because we have nowhere to move them to. So if we can move some of those households that we have already accepted a duty towards into other accommodation, that will free up places in our lodges for people for further emergency accommodation. So it's not one or the other. By having these one beds, this will then free up emergency accommodation in borough, which we can then, do you see what it's not one item or another. Thank you.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you very much for clearing that up. Right, Councillor Moyd wanted to come back, and then Councillor Hymas.
Yeah, look, you've spoken at length about sort of the rationale why we have to do this and the duty to ensure that the property is suitable. I appreciate all of that, and I agree with all of that. But my concern is, I mean, in an ideal world, we would not be doing this, of course, because however way you look at it, again, in an ideal world, this is going to be overcrowded to begin with, because even though there is a bedroom, there is a living room, there is a dining room and all of that. So there isn't a dedicated bedroom for the baby or the child. And we don't know, I just want to focus on the specifics. We don't know how old these children are. So if they're very extremely young babies, a few months old, okay, then if it is one bed with the parents, it's fine. So I guess what I wanted to maybe put forward as a recommendation is that because we hear people staying in temporary accommodation for such a long period of time, that perhaps with this saving, there should be a much regular review of families who are being placed. So in this case, you could have a family of 3, so that's the parents and a small child. We don't know how old the child is, because they never remain very young. They grow very fast. And then if we have this kind of temporary accommodation over 10, 12 years, then we have a 12-year-old baby in a 1-bedroom house with parents, with 2 parents. So I think my recommendation would be if we could have a much regular review, maybe annual basis or whatever, to ensure that we don't continue to put families, we don't in overcrowded conditions, because we've not looked at them, we just place them there, and just because that's how long it takes, and this family is going through the same process.
Sorry, can I just jump in really quickly as well?
Yes,
just
please.
it's related. So it says with a baby or young children. Does that mean a young child, or does it mean young children, or does it mean baby or babies?
As I've already explained, these are 1-bedroom properties. These are not studio flats. These are council 1-bedroom properties. A lot of them are quite large. To be honest, this is no different to a young person, a couple moving in to a property. The chances are that they are going to end up with children pretty quickly, and this could be happening within our permanent stock. So what I do agree with you, and I think that it's an action that probably should be taken forward, so thank you for suggesting it, is that I think that, and I'm not sure whether it's done, so I would need to find out whether we do regular reviews of all our households in temporary accommodation, to ensure that accommodation is still suitable. And so it would not just apply to this, because this could apply equally to somebody who's moved into the private sector. It's not necessarily just going to apply to properties that we're using as our council flats, where we're using council owned flats as temporary accommodation. So I think we need to get, obviously the homelessness officers are not here tonight because they sit under adults, but I think that as a proposal, I think it would be useful for us to find out whether we do that review of everybody in temporary accommodation, and if we don't, I think that we probably should be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you want to?
My question is it limited to 1-child families, or is it could it be 2-children families?
As I've said, this is not limited to 1-child families. This will be a small household with adults and children, and this is to, as I've already suggested, this would only be offered if it was considered suitable. This is not a single room. This would be at least a 2-room property, so it would not be overcrowded in terms of any kind of statutory sense. Otherwise, it would not be suitable. And so this is not just 1 child. What is important is the property remains suitable. Legally, we have to ensure the property remains suitable.
So it would be good just to get clarity. It's like a maximum of 2 adults and a maximum of how many children. That would be helpful, I think. And the ages of the children, like, is it okay to have 3 children if they're all very small, but not if they're teenagers?
Yeah, can I just make a recommendation on the back of that? I don't think it should be more than 1 child, really, because what are you talking about putting? So I think what Councillor Carlin is suggesting is that there is a bedroom, and then the living room is being used as a bedroom as well. Okay, obviously we are dealing with very exceptional circumstances, but then if you start putting in more than 1 child in the living room, for me it's just too overcrowded already. So I would ideally, if we have to place people with 3 people in a 1-bedroom family, it should be just at most 1 baby. I don't see how we can put more than that.
Okay, all right. You've made a proposal, but basically 2 recommendations on this this saving. So I don't know how the panel feels. I think probably the first recommendation we've probably agreed on, are we? About a regular review of the suitability in terms of the number of people that are living in the homes. So the second recommendation was to limit this to families with only 1 child. Is that agreed? Looks like the panel members agree to that as a recommendation. So we've got 2 recommendations on this proposal then. Okay. Thank you very much. Has anyone got any other further points to make on this specific savings proposal? Doesn't seem so. Does anyone have any further points to make on any of the other savings proposals that are listed?
I just need clarification on the next one, savings 008. It talks about 103 people in temporary accommodation who require 1-bedroom properties. But then the next couple of lines, they're only placing 100 people, 23 households, and then 77. What happens to the other 3? Because that adds up to 100.
If there's no answer to that right now, then maybe we can get that in writing. But yeah, that's true. The two figures lower down add up to 100, and the figure at the top is 103. So it sounds to me like we're planning to move 100 of those 103, but maybe we can just get some clarity on whether the figures have just gone slightly awry. Thanks. Okay, right. So it looks like we've finished discussing the savings proposals. There's also a section on the capital budget and new capital proposals. I don't know if panel members have got any questions on those. I had a question of clarification really on that, having looked at the figures in the papers. This was about the three capital bids mentioned in paragraph 8.31 of the Cabinet report, which is on page 54 of the packs. Let me just see if I can find it. So
I'm just going to finish my tomato soup.
Okay. Hold on a minute. I think I've got the wrong. Oh yeah, here we are. 8.31 of the so it's at the bottom of page 54, first paragraph under 8.31. It talks about significant increase in investment for the Wards Corner scheme of 66 million, the Gourley Triangle scheme of 108 million, and the Selby Urban Village scheme 46.7 million. But when I go down to where the new capital bids are listed on pages 87 to 90 of the report, let me see if I can find this now. Gourley Triangle, that's right. It says 59.4 million. That's the same as above. But then the Selby Urban Village, oh no, it's the Selby Urban. Apologies, I'm confusing myself. The Selby Urban Village, the numbers are the same, but the Gourley Triangle, we've only got 59.4 million in the new capital bid section compared to the 108 million mentioned in the Cabinet paper. And then for the Wards Corner, the new capital bid is only 3.3 million, whereas it's the cabinet papers talks about 66 million. So I don't know if I'm misunderstanding the figures in the paper there, or John, you were going to come in to respond.
Yeah, this is just a profiling issue. We traditionally present the capital programme over a 5-year period, because that's when we conceive of the MTFS as being that. But what's actually is happening is that those numbers run for future years. So beyond the lens through which you look at it. So in 2028, 29, there will be additional monies available to conclude the Wards Corner construction budget. So there probably is, and we had a late adjustment to the Wards Corner budget. So I'll look back at those words for when we go to the 7th of February meeting to make sure that they properly address the issue that the money goes out a bit further into further financial years beyond the 5 years of the MTFS.
Okay, so if I understand it, then the 3.3 million is just the very early stages of that, and then there's more money being bid for subsequent years that don't form part of the current MTFS. But that information just isn't in the papers, other than being in the overall headline figures. So maybe that should be clarified, and the same for the Gawley Triangle one as well. Otherwise, it could mislead people, I think. So maybe that just needs to be clarified in the papers.
Yeah.
Okay. And does it? Yes, Councillor Hymas.
Just a quick one with the expansion of the school street programme. I assume that budget doesn't account for the possible revenue that would come in by way of PCNs. Is that right?
No, this is the capital. This is the capital programme, so it would not reflect any income associated with it. To the extent that there is income, that would flow through environment and neighbourhoods and the penalty charge notices and all of that process that we have around that.
Great, thanks. And just on these capital bids for Wards Corner, Gawley Triangle, the Selby Centre site, I think I got an answer to a question I asked about this. Said that this borrowing is against the general fund rather than against the housing revenue account. That's correct, isn't it? So yeah. Is that correct? That is some of what we're going to be doing on these sites is building houses, isn't it? So is there also, in addition to this, going to be borrowing against the housing revenue account in order to build the housing element of those sites? Or could I just get some clarity on that?
Yep.
John, yes.
If I could assist. Oh. Yeah, so in this scenario, Casey will correct me if I get this wrong. So in this scenario, the general fund is doing a number of things on all of those sites. It's doing a regeneration project, and on wards it will be doing shops and all of that. And effectively what we're saying is that as part of the project, we will do all of that, and then we will sell the homes to the housing revenue account at a point in time. So we're almost acting like a developer and pre-selling these to the housing revenue account. And on the other side of the equation, on the housing revenue account, that will recognise the purchase of those properties in the same way if they were to go and buy a property on the market or to create its own housing. Does that clear?
Yeah, that answers my question. So at some point in the future, the housing revenue account will have to do the borrowing in order to buy the units once they've been built.
In effect, yes, but it will be part and parcel of its agreed business plan.
Yeah. Okay, I can see Councillor Gordon wants to come in.
Well, only to add briefly that obviously each project has to have its own business case. These are just envelopes at the moment, so each business case will have to stack up and be viable.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, right. That's all the questions I had on the capital part of the budget. Do any other panel members have any questions on the capital part of the budget? No. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So then there are other sections of the budget papers, but I was thinking that there might be some questions on the HRA section of the budget papers, especially given the deputation that we had this evening. I don't know whether anyone's got any questions kind of coming off the back of that. So do panel members have any questions on the HRA section of the budget papers?
If you're looking at me, Chair, I just maybe, it's just the point about the London housing. I wonder if the cabinet member can comment on that in terms of the point that was made during the deputation, whether the council is looking at that in terms of the new rent program.
Sorry, Charles, I didn't quite catch what you said. Could you just repeat the question, please?
During the deputation, an issue was raised that the mayor is now disregarding the London housing stuff. So I'm asking the question in terms of that, what is the council doing about it? But I know he said he hasn't spoken to you about it, but I was just wondering if you've given any thought.
Yeah, our understanding that London affordable rent is only going to be available until March. So effectively, we can only use that in the programme of houses that comes into those particular years. So if it isn't available thereafter, we would have to use formula rent unless the mayor comes forward with another alternative to London affordable rent, but we just don't know if that would be the case. So we are essentially using it where we can. And that's why it would cover 870 homes. Obviously, our ambition is to build 3,000 homes. So, it's a sizable minority, but a minority of the homes which will be at London affordable rent. Does that answer your question?
It's okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I can see Councillor Harrison-Mullane has a question. Go ahead.
So in some of the campaign materials sent to us by Haringey Defend Council Housing, they were talking about differences in the grant level between homes built under the older programme and the newer programme from the GLA. And about there being a higher grant level if we build homes under the programme where we can't charge London affordable rents. So what's the rationale behind the decision to get this housing built in the programme with the lower grant levels and the higher rents rather than the higher grant levels?
Yeah, I'll pass over to the director actually to answer that question.
The homes in question were always in the initial programme. I think that's the key point. And obviously we need to get the spend that the GLA has given us for that programme out the door. And one of the important things is that we do deliver on that so that the GLA continue to invest in our next round of homes in the basically the 23 to 26 programme, and we also have a whole range of sites lined up for that programme as well. So the reality is, if we didn't deliver the homes in the existing programme, we'd then be competing against ourselves for sites that are going to come in the next programme.
Yeah, sure.
Well, just to give you the figures that for the 21 to 26. So it's 2016 to 23 programme, we were awarded 120.2 million. That's the money that we need to get out of the door, otherwise it goes back. And then for the 21 to 26 round, 127.5 million. And equally, the GLA would have to give the money back to the government if they didn't spend it, if you see what I mean. So we can't just like swap between funds. So we're trying to sort of make sure that we maximise the amount of grant funding that we've got. It's absolutely essential to us having viability on any of the schemes, and everything that we're doing here is to protect our manifesto promise to build the 3,000 homes. It's the only way that we can do it. is the proposals that are on the table.
Okay, so I will bring in other members, but just to clarify, so what's being said is that because these homes were already in the I forget the start date, but up to 2023 programme, that only that lower grant level is available for those homes. They couldn't be transferred into the later programme. Now the question I have is, given that what we've been told is that London affordable rent is only available until coming March, does that mean that in order for those homes to be in that programme and to get their grant, they actually need to have a start on site by March at the latest?
Yeah, and there are several definitions of how what constitutes a start on site, and you know, if it takes it, we have to go and dig a hole somewhere to make sure that. But obviously, planning permission that we've got would count towards, you know, that definition of having started on site. But yeah, that is generally the case.
And there are no homes in that 870 that are yet to receive planning permission.
I think we'll need to come back with a written answer on that. I think the answer is no, but it's possible, obviously, that there may be one or two schemes going to planning between now and March where we might still be able to hit that start on site. But I think it includes things like some of the recent schemes that went, like wood ridings. But I'm not sure about whether there's any between now and March that were counted into that programme.
Thank you very much. Okay, having abused my position as chair, I'll now bring in, sorry, I saw Councillor Barnes had your hand up again.
Thank you. I wanted to comment briefly and then ask a question, but I just find it quite shocking that a bedsit and a one bedroom are charged at the same rent, given we've just had a conversation about how one bedroom is significantly better because you have a bedroom and a living room. So I'm not sure there's anything we can do about that, given that we're looking for savings at the moment and don't have a lot of money to spend. But I do find that anomalous. But my question relates to 9.19, where it talks about how much will be charged and how much more each week for a one bedroom home, given we've got a horrendous cost of living crisis at the moment. My own energy bills are eye-watering. Goodness knows what it's like if you're completely reliant on benefits. And then relating it to the revenue on page 68, where we have provision for bad debts for tenants, which is obviously quite big in 23, 24 and 24, 25, but then disappears, you know, pretty much in half thereafter. Is there enough money in there to support those tenants? Because we obviously do not want to see lots of people homeless, but there is probably going to be a shortfall and people will struggle.
Well, the first point is, by the way, on bed sits, we don't build any. We only we haven't got any bed sits.
We might have some historic bed sits.
We're not building any, definitely. They're only building one bed, but it's the definition comes together when you, in terms of the mayor's figures. So that's on that point. In terms of the London affordable rent, then it's well below the local housing allowance. So those people that are on housing benefit or the housing part of universal credit will be covered by that. We think that there might be a small number of residents that are affected by the benefit cap, but we think that is a very small number of about 10. And obviously, if there was the people that were wanting to bid for one of the new homes and that was struggling, then there is other means, advice, and that we can provide, and sometimes financial assistance if need be. So we think that actually, because it's well under the local housing allowance, that this won't be problematic. I don't know if directors wanted to add in to that. There's one other point, is that these properties are being built to very high, well, a couple of points. Firstly, these properties are being built to very high environmental standards. utility bills will be much lower for households. Also, if we think of where households are moving from, if they're moving from temporary accommodation, they're going to be paying far, far higher rents because they'll be paying the LHA minus 10%. So they're going to be paying far less if they move to an LAR property than if they were in temporary accommodation, which a fair number of these households will be. Over 60% of our residents are in receipt of housing benefit. So effectively, if we don't, the government's going to be paying any higher rates because that's they're going to be in receipt of housing benefit anyhow. And a lot of the larger families where that we're building specific properties for with disabilities, etc., they are in receipt of benefits, housing benefits already. So, I mean, the bottom line is, as Ruth has said, we need to continue with our house building program, and as everyone said, and ensure that we use the money that's already been given to us. So it has to be looked in the background of that. But this is LAR is so much lower than the LHA rate, and the LHA rate is sitting at only a third of market rate. There are already people who are bidding for properties who are moving into. I know somebody who bid for a property, a housing association property, that was at affordable rent. It was 80% of market rent, which is above LHA rate, and she was still absolutely happy to move from a temporary accommodation. She was still going to be paying less. I mean, she wasn't going to be paying less, but she wanted, this was a new build. She was so happy to take this new build house, even though the rent was going to be for a 3-bedroom, £420 a week. And I actually contacted her and said, are you sure you can afford the £420? She said, yes. So it's above LHA rate. She has got adult children. They will make the rent. And she is overjoyed to be moving into a brand new property at £420 a week. So these are new properties. They're, they've got all those kind of benefits as well. So, just to put it in slightly in context.
Councillor Gordon, you wanted to come in?
I just wanted to add a couple of other points that it isn't that this is the only sort of formula, if you like, to use coin a phrase, that we looked at in order, given where we were with the interest rate rises and the huge spike in construction and labour costs and so on, we've looked at all manner of means of doing this. So one of the proud boasts that we've got about the programme so far is that we've restricted the cross subsidy from for sale elements in the programme. So we've only got about 18% of cross subsidy from for sale homes, and that means that, obviously the for sale homes gets lost to, they go into private hands. So we restricted that, and we were very proud of that. We could, choose to go down that for sale route. Actually, house prices seem to be coming down slightly in London, so that probably wouldn't be a wise move. But we're constantly sort of looking at, how are we going to make this fit in order to maintain the programme and actually build the houses. This way, at least what we've got are council rents. They are secure tenancies. They would be homes that are going to people that are on our register. And bearing in mind, we have got 11,000 people on the waiting list. And that is a crisis we're not going to build our way out of, actually, even building the 3,000 homes, but at least it will eat into that. So I just wanted to assure the panel that we're looking at all sorts of ways. This is we think is the best solution given the situation that we are in.
Okay, thanks. I can see Casey on the screen. Casey, did you want to come in with something? Is that?
No, that's fine. I think Councillor Gordon has actually touched on the good points. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Councillor Hymas, you wanted to say, ask a question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lively debate, I think, from what I've seen, about whether we can call London affordable rents council rents. And I'm not going to get into the kind of nuances of that. But I think the more broad question is that we did make this manifesto commitment for 3,000 council homes at council rents. That's what it says. Some people will have an interpretation that London affordable rent is a council rent. Others would say it's a different type of product. When I'm looking at this document, there's section 9.43 talks about rent consultation. It just says there's no requirement for rent consultation, tenant consultation. Now, there might not be a requirement, but we are a council committed also to co-production. So I'm wondering if you can just detail exactly what consultation is going to be done at this point. Particularly, are there any specific groups that will be reached out to? Because at the moment, it looks like while you think that that is the best option, and it may well be, I'm not sure if enough has been done to engage with groups, particularly like highlighted by our deputation tonight, about what's going to be done to do that.
Sorry, I'll come in on that because in terms of rents, the rent at 7% is in the budget papers, so it will go out to the same statutory consultation. It will be consulted on with the rest of the budget in the same way as everything else. In terms of the delegation aren't here at the moment. In terms of consultations around service charges, what we do have a duty always to consult and to do a service review legally if we either change a supplier or if we are introducing anything to the service charges that people haven't been paying for example, bringing in a concierge service when there hasn't been one already, we would have to engage. And the level of engagement that housing services and Homes of Haringey did, and housing services still does with residents is a lot. There is a lot of resident engagement. So for example, as I said earlier, we have our customer call group, we have the residents advisory panel. So there's already a lot done around that, and that will be done in terms of service review. Going forward, we certainly will, within our governance structures, be adding in other and additional ways to work with residents around these issues. But Homes for Haringey came in on the 1st of June. This is not yet the time where we're able to do that, but going forward, there's certainly more things that we will be putting in place. But in terms of consultation on the 7% rent rise, it will go out in the statutory consultation and people will be able to comment.
I was asking about the London affordable thing, not the 7%.
Well, I think the only way that you can define it is as council rent. You get a secure council tenancy. The only people that can apply are people that are on the housing register, and it is seen by the grant funding that we get is Building Council Homes for Londoners. That is Council Homes for Londoners. That's the grant funding that funds it. I think on all of those measures, it's a council rent. Most other councils use law already and just refer to them, don't differentiate, just refer to them as council rents. And it is accepted, in terms of planning as a council rent. So I think there's probably some people who want to make some mileage out of that. I don't think there's any mileage in it. It's a council rent. It's a way that we are actually making the budget balance.
Okay.
Sorry, if I could come in, if I could just quote, sorry, if it can just clarify, I think is that, as Ruth has said, the definition is in the London plan. And if you want to look it up, it's a paragraph 4.2 6.3 of the London Plan, and I'll quote it to you. The Mayor is committed to developing genuinely affordable housing. Within the broad definition of affordable housing, the Mayor's preferred affordable housing tenures are homes based on social rent levels, including social rent and London affordable rent. Number one. Okay, so this includes,
Why would
as this, and this
social rent
includes,
and London affordable rent if they were
because these are both council rents, and that's why it's described together. These are considered to be low housing rent products. So that's why these are both social rent levels. And that's why they're both considered to be, by the Mayor of London, council rents.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Ham.
really quickly is then on that planning point, so that for planning context, London affordable rent is council rent, so we wouldn't need to go back out and get further planning amendments for those applications that have already gone through.
Can I let Mr. Szatowski come back on that?
Thank you very much. So each case will be different, and each case will need to be checked on its own basis on what was granted permission at the time. But the bigger picture, so Councillor Carlin is absolutely correct. The London affordable rent is seen within the same umbrella alongside social rent, council rent, target rent, that kind of thing, under the umbrella of low cost rented housing. So so in policy terms, it all falls under the same umbrella. There's a detailed technical question on each individual permission on the precise wording that was used at that particular time on whether it would need to come back to planning or not. But the principle and the policy, it does fall within the same umbrella. So there's no major difference in planning policy terms.
Councillor Blake.
So just for clarification on Paul Burnham's presentation, he said the Mayor was scrapping that form of rent. Can you just explain what he means by that?
Well, I think Councillor Gordon covered this earlier, but I think it's not so much that the Mayor is scrapping it, but in the detailed sort of agreement between the GLA and the government on the new programme. The GLA are not able to, at the moment, in terms of that negotiation, allow councils to charge London affordable rent on the new programme, the 23 to 26 programme. That was negotiated for the current programme, so that it's a kind of programming issue that I believe has been subject to discussion between the GLA and government. But Hannah, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I was going to say the same thing, really, that I think the word scrapping refers to the fact that from the next round of funding, homes would no longer be let at, according to the from the GLA's round of funding, are no longer to be let at London affordable rent.
Yeah, just to clarify any confusion, obviously Mr. Burnham isn't here to clarify this, but what he said alluded to that the decision was taken on the grounds of affordability. Is that correct or not? Just for the record.
My understanding is it's not correct, because the London plan is really clear that it is considered to be a low cost, affordable rent product, you know, there's no reason why that would be different for the new programme than now. So I don't think it's the case that the GLA have actively decided to scrap London affordable rent in the way it was described. I think it is just that they are only allowed to charge it on the existing programme.
Go on, Councillor Gordon, you've got another response on this?
I'm just going to add briefly that, you know, the Tories have been constantly trying, you know, what seems to be a good thing of keeping rents low, obviously because it affects the benefits bill, and that's why they've gotten. So for 4 years, between 2016 and 2020, they actually forced councils to lower the rents, and we have been suffering from that. So even if we'd have been able to put rents up by CPI plus 1%, which what they then later reintroduced, actually we would still be better off than we are under this scheme. So yeah, there is this sort of constant battle going back and forth between national government, who are trying to reduce the benefits bill, and basically putting the onus on local councils, that we are left with how how do we then finance the replenishment and refurbishment of our stock, and at the same time as building new council homes. Just trying to push the blame back onto councils.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Adjei, you had a question.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask what it's very echoey, has brought about this change of approach, because on the other side of it, the previous cabinet member was put under tremendous pressure about rent. Now it's been captured under the low cost affordable rent, whether it's council rent or London affordable rent. We're now saying that, oh, well, it's all okay. From a political point of view, I think we need to be clear in terms of our manifesto promises, for what we said we were going to be charging council tenants. So it's not a case of, yes, London affordable rent is okay, whether the government is going to strap it or not. I just want to know what has changed. I know you've said that, oh, well, it's all got to do with the budget, you know, so we need to be clear from a political point of view. If we want to charge London affordable because of the scheme, let's say this is what we're doing. If it's a council's low social rent, we're saying, let's go for that. So there needs to be clarity. And that's the point I'm making. And I need to understand from a political point of view what has changed. It's not for officers, so I've directed it to officers. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm perfectly clear. I did say this at the cabinet meeting when we had a similar deputation, that if it had been left to my political preference, we would have just been doing the formula rent. But we had the crazy mini budget from Liz Truss, and which put an enormous spike on interest rates, which haven't gone down. I think the MPC are either meeting today or have met, and there will be a further likelihood of another 1% going on interest rates again. And we have seen, because of a combination of Brexit and particularly the war in Ukraine, has combined to create a massive spike in construction charges and in labour costs and so on. So given all of that, we had no choice. You know, otherwise we could have just kept to the programme of using formula rent and not introduce this. This is the least worst option, if you like, and I think we've been honest with that. That's exactly what I said at the cabinet meeting just a few nights ago. So that's the difference. We've gone into an economic crisis that everybody's aware of, and we have got this massive spike in interest rates, which doesn't look as if it's going to be abating anytime soon.
Okay, thanks for that. I had some comments really, basically on clarity. Really, I'd like to make a recommendation really, because there is a bit of confusion about these terms: social rent, council rent. I was looking for it before, but I couldn't find it. I saw somewhere a discussion in which social rent was equated with formula rent. And I've seen other places council rent is equated with formula rent, and then we're saying social rent is basically, you know, there's a variety of different social rents, so there's a variety of different council rents. So the recommendation I'd like to make is that the council always is clear about what it's talking about when we're talking about rent levels. So we state, if we're talking about formula rent, we say formula rent. We don't say council rent. We don't say social rent. We say formula rent. And if we're talking about London affordable rent, we say London affordable rent. And if we're talking about something a bit vaguer that hasn't been decided yet, then we make that clear. I think that's something that we ought to be doing. The other thing I wanted to say was just some of the stuff in the papers, in the cabinet paper, about the relative affordability of formula rent and London affordable rent. I'm looking at, let's see, it talks about how London affordable rent is close to the cap, as if the cap is what is charged. But when we're doing the formula for calculating what the rent is, it's not just about the cap, is it? It can be below the cap. So if you're, my understanding is if you're building homes in Highgate, because the calculation would take you above the cap, then you charge the cap. But if you're building homes in other wards, the calculation is below the cap, so formula rent is below the cap. So it's maybe not quite accurate to just be comparing it with the cap all the time, that we also need to be looking at what the actual formula rent would be in on a ward by ward basis. And then we would see that actually the gap between the affordability of London affordable rent and formula rent is actually a little bit larger than what's being presented in this paper. What was my other point? Oh yeah, the other point was that there seems to be a kind of implication that everybody in council homes is on housing benefit, and it's never quite explicitly stated, but it's always like whenever we're talking about London affordable rent, we're always told, well, you know, the local housing allowance is you know, it's going to be covered by the local housing allowance. So we're always saying, well, people who are on housing benefit will be covered by that. But it would also be good to have some clarity on how many people that we're talking about here, people who are in temporary accommodation that the council has a duty to house, that aren't actually in receipt of benefits because they are actually working. I'm sure there are people like that, and it would be good to know how many people they are, because this change in policy will affect them to some extent in the future in terms of what rent they'll be paying. So I just think, you know, we need to have a little bit more clarity about that. Councillor Carlin wants to.
Sorry, I completely agree with you, and that's why I gave the example of the person that I did earlier, who is quite happy to move into a property that's charging £420 a week. I don't think you can take it on either side. There will be people in the 40% who are not on housing benefit, who are just above, just on the verge of needing a housing benefit. But there are also going to be people like somebody who moved into my street, into a council property, who immediately set about buying it and bought it, and has a huge car parked outside his house, and he's also a council tenant. So there are all manner of people who are council tenants. You can't go onto the register at the moment. You can't, in terms of our allocation policy, if you're not in housing need. But there will be people who are already council tenants who are not in housing need, who could probably might be able to afford to even pay market rent, and yet they are entitled to council rents as well. So there's a, you know, there's a multitude of people with different financial circumstances in both in terms of who are on our waiting list and looking for other housing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, do panel members have any further questions? Councillor Barnes.
Hi, this is on a totally different point, but it's the table 9.4 that looks at the HRA account and the borrowing particularly, and this is probably more for the officers in finance than anyone else. We are looking to borrow an awful lot of money, and if you look at the other table, the capital financing costs, I assume, are the interest rates and any other costs in borrowing that. Are you happy with how much we're borrowing, given that we need to balance the books, but only say £1 million, we're borrowing huge amounts every year. So are you happy with this? Is this sustainable as a council?
Let me respond to that, Councillor Zahn.
I think Casey.
Can you hear me? I'm hearing myself.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Councillor, for the question. I think if you look at that report, we make it clearly that the HRA MTFS is not where we want it to be, and we are working towards getting it to a level where it should be. It's not yet balanced by the February cabinet, and that means we're looking at all aspects of it. But talking about the interest rate, whether we are comfortable at it as it is, we have a model that we use to ensure that the borrowing that we're carrying in the HRA over a 30-year period is such that the HRA will be able to withstand such borrowing, will be able to pay back interest on those borrowings. And that leads us to a point where we come back to cabinet to say, yes, we are comfortable with what we have produced before you. So, and there's a metric we use, which is called the interest cover ratio. So that tracks the level of borrowing year on year that the HRA will be able to carry and still remain sustainable. So at the moment, what you have there, what you have in those papers, I would say is not a comfortable position for us to be in, because we set our ICR such that we generate annual surplus of about 8 million year on year. If you look at that table, you find out that the annual surplus for the last 3 years is below 8 million. So, and that's why we say we have a lot of measures we are looking at to make sure we bring this back to where it should be. So hopefully by February, we'll come back to you with a HRA plan that is balanced and generating enough revenue to pay off the level of debt we're carrying in the HRA. And at that point, we'll tell you that we are comfortable. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I guess my point is that it is a huge amount of money that's spent within housing and regeneration, and for obvious reasons, because none of those things are cheap. So I just wanted to see if the officers are comfortable. And partly at the back of your mind, it's always that Croydon has become bankrupt to Northamptonshire, and sorry, okay.
I think it's firstly it's really important to differentiate ourselves from some of those other examples where they set up council development companies and borrowed against income from development. That's not what we. Sorry, I don't. This might be my phone this time. That is not the approach that we are taking. We're taking a really sensible, planned approach as part of our council housing revenue account and borrowing at a level that we can afford within the overall housing revenue account business plan. What Casey's described is a lot of work that goes on a monthly basis to look at all of the different factors that feed into the housing revenue account, including things like future rental income and all of those sorts of factors. We also, when we borrow money, the rate we borrow at is locked in at that point. But if rates start increasing, future borrowing will increase, and then we have to look at what we borrow in future, and we're constantly kind of iterating the plan. So we will never sort of agree to a plan where we're not comfortable that it's going to be affordable. And obviously, as I say, the rates are locked in at the point that we borrow them. That's probably not. I probably shouldn't speak to that. That's probably more of a finance officer point, but it's something that we do look at.
Yeah, Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, thank you. I only wanted to add to that I think there's been a sort of balance between, prudently managing the HRA and also being politically ambitious, because, the investment we're looking at here is £2 billion worth of investment into our stock and our new build. I think that's an ambitious programme, but I think the way that we're going about it is prudent and safe and just about getting there. So I think we're striking a nice balance. I mean, that includes, by the way, the massive investment that that's just been agreed at planning at Broadwater Farm. I'm just a little plug here. So I'm being a bit cheeky, Chair. I do apologise, but just a plug for Broadwater Farm, because we've just agreed that in planning that we were building almost 300 council homes there and refurbishing the estate. And I think that is a massively ambitious programme that we've been working with the residents for 5 years to achieve, and we did hit that major milestone. So apologies, Chair, I was a bit cheeky there, but I just wanted to get a plug in there.
That's fine. Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Harrison-Mullane, did you have another point?
This is on a slightly separate point, but just about the 4 weeks notice for new rents and service charges. I noticed that one of the items included on service charges is heating. I'm assuming this is for estates with communal boilers. I just wanted to ask, sort of when the new service charges are introduced with the wider situation with increasing energy costs, will there be changes there? Will tenants be seeing higher costs? Will there be any discontinuity with what was before? And do we think that 4 weeks is enough notice?
We are not increasing our energy costs over the winter. That's a decision we absolutely appreciate the difficulties that our households are going to face. So that's not going to be increased. They're not going to be increased over this winter. And I can assure you that I know there have been reports about heat networking costs, but we're keeping those under from other authorities in terms of greatly escalating prices on energy network. A lot of those are private providers, but we will be doing everything to ensure that we're not in that position.
Okay. Did you get an answer about the notice? Notice. Is 4 weeks notice enough? Was the question.
Yeah, so that 4-week notice period is the statutory period that we give for all sorts of changes like this. So changes to service charges, to rents, etc. Obviously not to rents, but yeah, to service charges, any changes to housing management and things like that. So yeah, I think in this context, we're confident that that's an appropriate amount of time, an appropriate amount of notice to give to those tenants.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it looks like panel members don't have any more questions on this part of the budget. I suppose I should just ask because there were some other bits in the budget papers, so if anyone's got any other questions regarding the budget, now's your time to put your hand up and speak. It doesn't look like it. So what we need to do now is make sure that we're agreed on the recommendations that we're going to make. We've mentioned a couple. I don't know if we've got any more that have come to mind during the discussion. So, Philip, have you got to hand the recommendations that we've agreed so far? I think there were 2 or 3 of them. If I remember, we had a couple on the saving related to use of 1-bed accommodation, which was so we agreed a regular check on the suitability of the housing. What was the second?
Can we make it more specific? Make an annual review.
An annual review. Okay.
And the other one was that the size of the family.
So, an annual review on the suitability of the size of the housing for the 1-bed accommodation, and recommendation that this is limited to families with 1 child only. Okay. Did panel members have any specific recommendations to make on any of the other proposals in the budget? Councillor Hymas.
Well, just a commitment to further consultation around London affordable rent and a clarity on the planning point, I think, if that is the recommendation, but to get firmly understand Because I just think, I mean, the point I'm making really is that if these applications have gone out to planning in one form and people had the understanding, even if perhaps it wasn't right, that they were having social housing, council formula rent housing built in their ward, and then it turns out that it's at a different rent, that might be something that some people could have an issue with. So I'm just conscious that, yeah, there needs to be sort of some form of consultation there around the London affordable rent change.
So there seems to be more than one thing folded in there. So there's a kind of engagement consultation point, and then something quite specific about planning applications that have already gone through on what appears to be the basis of formula rent. So you've asked for clarity on the planning application point, but I think what was the response that came back, that would depend on the detail of the decision that was made, and the basis for that decision. So it would be on a kind of case by case basis. So I don't know what further clarity overall could be provided. But yeah, I don't know if anyone's got any specific. Okay, maybe we can ask to be kept updated on those which schemes are going to have London affordable rent used on them. Maybe if that could be something that could come back to this panel. Is that okay as a recommendation? So if we ask to be informed on which schemes are going to have London affordable rent used on them on a regular basis, then that might deal with that point. But just in terms of the consultation point, did you have anything specific about how we engage with people on this? Okay, so I mean, obviously the draft budget has already gone out for consultation, so we can't kind of make a recommendation on something that's already been decided or what's going out to consultation. Yeah, okay. I had a recommendation on kind of clarity in future on the use of terminology on what does. So if we find a form of words for that the council is specific in its kind of communications and when decisions are being taken over what kind of rent it is that we're talking about, because these terms are a bit fluid. Okay.
I think in terms of this, I think this is struggling. This is the budget that we're looking at, and then I would say if there is any, there needs to, what I think was being is clarity. I think I talked about this previously. I think Ruth talked about, Councillor Gordon talked about the budget, in terms of the housing and what we charged, and you talked overall. Basically, going forward, we need to be clear on the cabinet, whether you consult or not. I think it's there. That's why I didn't want to ask too many, but we just need to make it clear or clearer that on this scheme, we're going to be charging X, Y, or Z because of the planning requirement. You talked about the £420 per week that someone is prepared to pay. That's an aside, but because they can afford it. Now we're talking about the council's budget. Now, in terms of the proposals contained within that, you are satisfied that you've gone through the process, the officers have explained, and it's just that bit of clarity in terms of the housing element that, is it London affordable or social? You just need to be clear. I think that's what we're struggling about, to say, how do you, with a form of words, capture that, but in terms of the budget overall, is the committee satisfied that the proposals that's been put forward are okay, but you just need to 1, 2, 3 outline those points? I think that's more or less it, isn't it? Where we're coming from. I mean, from my point of view, having, looked after the budget before, I think from what's been proposed is okay. The point about the clarity is just on top of the two which you've already mentioned. It's just that we should just be clear about whether we are charging London Affordable or the others subject to the planning. That's it, in my humble opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Adjei. And I think that's correct. I mean, I think we would all prefer that we didn't have to make this move to London Affordable Rent, as Councillor Gordon has said. But I think we're all aware of the challenges that we're facing, the economic challenges. So I think we're okay with well, we're not going to recommend that doesn't happen, I don't think. So I think overall, other than the recommendations that we made, we're happy to say that we're agreeing for that budget to go forward. Yeah. Okay. All right. So the other thing that Philip reminded me of was just ask for a little more clarity, some reassurances about the relative affordability of London affordable rent and formula rent based on the actual formula rather than the just the cap. So if we could have that information provided to us for next meeting.
Before the proposals are agreed at scrutiny on the 9th of January. So all of the recommendations that different parts are put together this process.
Okay, all right. So if we could get that, it's the 19th of January. The 19th of January. So if we could get that information to us before the 19th of January, that would be useful. Thank you very much. Okay. Anything further? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much to the Cabinet members and officers who've joined us this evening. We've just got the work programme, which Philip is going to introduce.
So I wasn't going to say very much, but in your pack, page 93, you have a draft work plan. Sorry, you have the work plan for this year. So it was just to note the work plan and to ask members if they had anything they would like to put forward for the last meeting of the municipal year, which is in February. So Councillor Carlin agreed to bring the report around.
Just on the previous point, Matt, I'm wondering whether there's a possible suggestion that we could ask a recommendation for that all the London affordable rents do at least come back to planning. So we proactively say that they should. And then the differences in cost between what would be formula rent in that area and London affordable rent are then given to the planning committee as an opportunity for them to then make sure that the differences aren't so wide, particularly like, as we said, outside of Highgate. But I don't know if I'm sorry, I just suddenly was thinking about the consultation.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good point, but I don't think it's something that we really are able to do because it's a planning issue. So it would be about the planning policy and planning law, and it's not really for us to make recommendations for the planning committee where we make recommendations for the executive. So planning's kind of a little bit separate to the kind of executive scrutiny kind of structure. So it's down to what the planning law is really as to whether a planning application needs to go back for a decision. But thanks for that anyway.
So 27th of February. So the Councillor Carlin put forward a report coming back here around the repairs improvement plan, and I guess it was just to ask members whether there was any other specific items that they would like to put forward for that meeting?
Thank you very much for that, Philip. Does anyone have anything here and now that they want to suggest for our meeting on the 27th of February?
Yeah.
A warmer room. Okay. Well, hopefully it will be in any case, but yeah. Okay. So anyone has anything they want to suggest for the meeting, then feel free to email me, copy Philip in, please, and yeah, can we just formally note the work plan before we close the meeting? Okay, work plan is noted. Yeah, so if you do have any items for the next meeting,
when are we doing the scrutiny review?
yeah, we need to get some meetings set up for the scrutiny review.
So I guess once we've got the budget out of the way, I'll be emailing you all. We'll get some dates. But I guess it's obviously trying to balance just when the officers are available for the evidence sessions and stuff. Yeah, that'll be happening. I mean, the scrutiny review, sorry, the evidence gathering sessions don't necessarily need to be in person, no. But obviously officers will need time to prepare to come and give presentations and give evidence. And, you know, a lot of them are quite busy compiling the budget and all the rest of it. So it's just sort of factoring that into.
Just before the meeting formally closes, just to say on the point I was saying before, if you do have any items that you want to suggest for the next meeting, could you please let me know before the 11th of January, which is when the agenda setting meeting happens. Thanks.